All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Forge Your Life podcast. Here today with your host, Richard Fu from richardfu.com and The Ultimate Man. Today, guys, I'm excited to have this guy on. His name is Chris Deojee, right? And he's an amazing guy. I've been waiting. Seriously, we've been trying to get this done for months now. And I'm excited to have him on because, when I start looking into what Chris does, he is a mental healer. He really has worked with so many types of men, really break down this idea of the myth of the patriarch, right? And not only that, Chris has done some amazing stuff to help guys see things in a different perspective, and that's why I'm excited to get him on, because this is what life's really about. It's about being open to seeing new perspectives. So guys, I want you to welcome Chris Deojee with me. Chris, good to have you on the show, brother.
Hey, Richard, great to have you on, and hello to all the listeners out there. Thanks for giving us your very precious time and attention on the show. I look forward to sharing what I can to help each of us become the ultimate in manhood in our lifetimes if we can. What a great aspiration to set out there, Richard. Great to be a part of your project here. Let's forge lives.
You're awesome, man. Love it, love it.
Yeah.
And so, Chris, man, talk us through your story, man. Obviously you can help guys now mentally heal themselves, right, and become men again. But how talk us through your journey. How did you walk through that path for yourself?
Well, this is a bit of a long journey. This is it. So like you're saying, the branch of mental healing I do is quite broad. It applies to more than just gender. Gender is one part of it. So the stuff I do is mainly about how in the West, or anybody that's been trained in the West, has a few, I consider a few things wrong in the head. I consider we're all a bit mentally ill. And those aspects apply to how we feel about our environment. We talk about visiting nature. If you ask any Aboriginal guy in Australia, ask them if they visit nature, they'll laugh at you because, we are nature. There's a part of our mind that is disconnected from nature that talks about visiting it. And it's that part of mind that I deal with. It's like disconnected. It's disembodied. It's disembodied from our sensuality. It's disembodied from our sexuality. And it means that when we do have sensuality and sexuality and feelings going through us, this part of mind goes haywire because of how we've been trained to use it. So that's why I call what I do mental healing, because it gets into that space. So the stuff we're going to be focusing on is gender, but I do other branches of it to do with just general behavior. I think people are really underestimating how much gender is the linchpin that influences how they behave, though. So my journey goes right the way back to when I was, a baby, basically. I grew up in a broken home where my dad ran off with my mum's sister when I was 2 years old. Wow. He then married her and had children that were both my half-brothers and sisters as well as my cousins. And I grew up with loads of people giving me funny looks and strange comments. And I was like, well, this is normal, isn't it? Because it was normal for me. And then when I hit my teens, I realized what an awful role model my dad was, and everybody else, in fact, had a real rejection of masculinity, to be quite honest. I looked around the world and I just saw men that were pitiful, pathetic examples of what I thought a man could be, and I didn't see anybody really defining it. So I decided my gender, I suppose my subconscious gender journey began then. My conscious gender journey probably began in my early 20s when I discovered a Toltec author called Tayun Mares, who wrote a book called The Quest for Maleness. And that was over 20 years ago now. I worked with that for 10 years, and I've been running my own gender events with my own breakthroughs for over 10 years now, and I get amazing reviews working with both men and women and couples. But it's very, very radical work. It's controversial work. It's not something anybody else is doing. I'll give you some examples of how I get guys into the work. So let's look at this. The doorway into masculinity work for me lies in the myth of patriarchy. So if you're like me, you were told that we were brought up in a patriarchy, which I define as imbalanced masculinity causing damage to everyone and everything. That's me paraphrasing how I understood patriarchy. Obviously, there's nuances to it, but that was how I understood it. And on my journey in my life, I didn't really see evidence of that in my experience. I didn't see guys getting privileges that women didn't. I could accept that guys in their 50s and 60s saw that, but in my life, I didn't see gender imbalance in terms of in the workplace or things like that. But I did see something else happening. I saw there was places I couldn't go as a man unless I wore certain clothes. And I was like, well, what's this all about? So I'll ask you, Richard, now, this is an example. All right, this is a casual version of what we call the shirt. But obviously, there are formal versions that I can't go into certain workplaces or clubs unless I'm wearing one. So if we imagine I'm in a nice shirt for going out at the weekend or something, what do we call this part here?
The collar, right?
A collar, yeah. It's a collar. And what's the part around the wrists?
The cuffs?
Cuffs, that's right, cuffs. And sometimes I'll have to wear a tie around my neck as well, won't I?
Mm-hmm.
So, well, who wears collars and cuffs? Who wears a collar and cuffs and a tie?
Just a guy in a suit, I guess.
Yeah. Now, this is where you've been tricked by context. You've been tricked by the fabric. What if they were made of metal? Who would wear metal collar and cuffs?
I guess prisoners.
Prisoners or slaves. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So we, as men, there's places we can't go unless we are the ones that are collared and cuffed. And just because the fabric has changed, it doesn't change what they're symbols of. A collar and cuffs has never been symbols of anything other than slavery and prisonership. And I've yet, in over 10 years, in over 20 years of doing the collar and cuffs, I've never met anyone that can give me a context of collar and cuffs that does not imply being a slave or a prisoner in some way. And I can test, this is just the doorway into my masculinity work, I can test that it cannot be a patriarchy if even the most senior men in the world do not get out unless they're collared. So that's where I begin the journey. And I say we live in a graded collar system. It's blue collar, white collar, dog collar. All your police are known by your collar number. And that doesn't matter whether you're in America, the UK, Australia, Europe, anywhere. All police are known by their collar number. And that's because they're uncuffed. You see, they're uncuffed. They carry cuffs, but they're uncuffed. But they actually are known by a collar number. This is a really powerful indication of a totally different story going on under our noses to the one that we've been fed. And this is what the media has promoted, the very sort of physical and obvious challenges women have had to go through in the journey of their gender power. And we're seeing women standing strong in their gender power at the minute in our times. We're dealing with really strong women, beautiful, beautiful women to aspire and admire and be drawn to and attracted to. But the men are in a totally different pot. If you look at the pot of the men at the minute, it's a pretty sordid affair, if you ask me, from my perspective of gender work. It's an ugly mess, really, in the old man pit. Because if you have a look, there's so much window dressing of masculinity. There's so much covering up of shame, guilt, fraud, blame, and it all lies down to this undercurrent that I'm talking about, where secretly, if you are not a man in his 50s, if you're younger than 50, then you will be like me, and you got the message that you might not have heard it verbally, but I'm going to paraphrase the kind of the message on the undercurrents, on the waves you'll have received is, men are to blame. Masculinity is to blame. It's your fault. You're one of them. Now that's passively in there, which is then to say, be careful what you do with that masculinity because it causes harm. It does damage. And then what happens to guys is, and this is what happened to me, you know, I grew up with deep shame of being a man. I didn't know it was conscious. I didn't realize I had to delve into my subconscious deeply to find out how much man shame I had that affected how I was with women, how I was with other men. It affected my journey into manhood, where my rite of passage from boy to man got delayed and went to well into my 30s because of my shame of developing masculinity as an actual, almost like limb of self. So there's an interesting thing here to do with the blame aspect, because a lot of guys will say they're not carrying it, but I can test that when you look at their behavior. And anybody who is still engaging in what I consider to be old paradigm alpha male characteristics, which is control, domination, manipulation, coercion, deceit, if people are using any of these strategies around their women, then to me those are the strategies of the boy. It's the old alpha. It's the one who needs to coerce and manipulate to get his way, as opposed to one who's just exuding attraction because, you know, he is the dawn in himself. You know, that's what I consider to be the ultimate man. He doesn't require women dripping on his arms because his value is found inside. And that was a challenge that I had growing up, was that I saw the women in my life and around me punishing the men in their lives for the deeds of men long dead or distant. And then I saw men, including myself, carrying shame and blame and censoring myself for the deeds of men long dead or distant. And I found this was a really deep wound, really deep, really affecting before I even lifted my hand, for fear someone might think I was going to be a violent man. You know, that any expression of the man was aggressive, manipulative, domineering, all the rest of it. I found that the wound was so deep in me, I had to totally reset my masculine altogether, reset it, delve into what it meant. And that's what gave rise to my gender work, was that quest. And now I get I get, you know, testimonials that millionaires would kill for, but I'm terrible at marketing and terrible at things like that. And that's why interviews like this are invaluable for me, because my work is based on the oral tradition. So in our conversation in the last few minutes, I haven't used a single word you haven't heard before, but I've probably managed to share a few new ideas in there in a way that you haven't heard before. And that's why writing about my work is very difficult, because I use the words in different ways. But in terms of us having a verbal interaction, we can kind of navigate into whole new terrains of gender, but using exactly the same language as we always did. That's why I call it mental healing. We're getting into the mental space of how you define and understand and experience gender.
So, Chrisman, it's a huge, like, I think
there.
it was like a flood just hit me in the face, right? So let me
yeah, man.
Like, so, you know, you talk about, what is it? You talk about like that it's really important, right, for men to recognize that sometimes we're blaming ourselves, and of course for the women listening, that we're blaming men for past deeds or actions of the people that have affected our lives, and, you know, maybe those people that have gone by as well. So what do you mean by that, right? Like, so are we carrying things from the past, even though I may not have, you know, interacted with those people? Or what do you mean by that? Like, on top of that, how do we know?
I mean, like, yeah, I don't mean stuff. I don't mean like some kind of, you know, inbred racial guilt or inbred gender guilt or shame. I don't mean it's something like that's in our genes. I mean, it's something that is learned. So it is based on things that have happened in our lives or things that we witnessed in our lives. So I know that for me, for example, I'll give you my anecdote on that one. So I was a young teen boy with no man in the household, being brought up with women around me. And I saw how my sisters, who were older than me, were being treated by the men and the boys in their life. They were quite a bit older than me. And as a result of how I saw them being treated, I began to disidentify with being a man. You know, I began to disidentify with it because I thought, well, if that's a man, I don't identify with that. And so I began to disidentify with it. Now, what also happens is, so that's from my experience in terms of, or if I heard that, you know, there was a gang rape in Montenegro or something like that, and all these guys, you know, mauled some teenage girl or something like that. When I hear the deep men long distant, or men distant, and then I identify with that because I'm a man, that's actually, I mean, this is to do with personal boundary issue. I've healed that now, but unless you deal with your personal boundary issues, our culture has a way of homogenizing everything, which is, you know, you can speak for your gender, you can speak for your race, you can speak for your class, you can speak for all those things, which actually isn't true. All of us can only speak for ourselves. You know, I can't speak for, you know, brown-skinned people. I can't speak for all men. I can't speak for all whatever. I can only speak for myself. But our culture has made it so that if I say we or us or whatever, I'm almost like temporarily allowed to speak for men, you know, and it's a real wound, that, because then it allows the scattering to take place, which is what we've got, which is, you know, somebody's dad, you know, some boy grows up seeing his dad hitting his mum. He hates that. And so he then thinks, oh, that's what men do. And then he disidentifies with his own masculine, you know, the capacity within himself to be aggressive, which is on the masculine side, but that doesn't need to translate into violence. So what's happened here is, I mean, I'll maybe approach it from a different way here. What's happened here is we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater with masculinity. Have you ever heard that phrase, throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah.
So that's when you look at a bath, it's like, oh, that's minging, that water's yucky. Oh, get rid of that. And so you throw, oh, the baby was still in it. Oh, no. And I thought everything I threw out was dirty. So this is what I perceive has happened to a lot of masculinity, where how masculinity is expressed has been pretty horrible. So control, domination, you know, whatever else in different ways that it's expressed negatively. And certain, it doesn't apply to all men, but some guys grow up thinking, oh, that energy rising in me, that surge, that charge rising in me, that gives rise to this aggression, or that gives rise to this sexual desire or this sexual demand. Therefore, it must be bad. I'm going to get rid of that because I saw that that's the energy that reaches people. That's the energy that fights people. So I'm not going to touch that. I'm not one of those guys. I'm a nice guy. Yeah, I'm a pacifist. Yeah, I don't have any violence or aggression in me, all the rest of it. And what guys don't realize is they've totally, like, cut off from a huge part of their embodied truth, which is you have these feelings in as part of your makeup. So I do this thing at all my events. I'll try and angle this camera to show you what I mean. I'm on a bed here, so just give me a second. So when you're a baby, you're like this. You're like, rah, rah. So when you're a baby, your arms and your legs are kicking about all over the place. You've got no dexterity in your body. Mm-hmm. You're clawing your mom as often as you're caressing her. You know, you knock over the milk as often as you pick it up. And then in about a year, you went from spasming and kicking and lashing to being able to walk just by watching people. And then in a few years, instead of just going all the time, you started to make words that people could understand. And so you went from this spasmic lashing to a dexterous wielding of your limbs, arms, hands, stuff. Now I can hold hot coffee without spilling it. But that's actually a feat of extreme dexterity. That took me years to get right. I've burnt myself, cut myself, hacked myself up to be able to do that and make it look easy. Mm-hmm. What people realize is emotions, mind, and gender work in exactly the same way as the body did. And that is when they first stir, they spasm and they lash. Arousal, self-consciousness, shame, guilt, all these thoughts about myself, all these thoughts about the world. They're firing all over the place. They're judging me as much as they're judging everybody else, and it's hurting me as much as everybody else. Oh my goodness, how can I manage all this? And because there's no support to get dexterous with our emotions and mind and our sexuality and sensuality in the same way as we do with our physicality, most people are still spasming. Most people will pretend, like I was talking about the guy who pretends he's not got sexuality, or the guy that pretends he's not got aggression in him. What he's really done is he's taken a whole limb and he's strapped it up and pretended he's not got it. And that's a bit like a baby saying, oh, my arm clawed my mum. Oh dear, I'm going to strap that up and never let it claw anyone ever again. I don't have that part of self. That's not me. Oh, I'm one of these new guys. Yeah, ladies, you're totally safe around me because I don't have any of that energy in me. And it's just toxic diseased masculinity, because what will happen is when those guys are put under positions of stress and strain, the pressure is going to build up in that neglected part of self, and either the guy's going to cave in and have a breakdown, or he's going to have an explosion and an outburst, what I call a spasm. Mm-hmm. So for guys that haven't explored their sensuality, or guys that haven't explored their gender, if they've approached it with shame, guilt, or blame, what happens is it's strapped up a bit like an emotion. Like the best example is anger. Let me use anger rather than sexuality. Let's use anger. So anger is the most bullied emotion of all. So generally in the West, anger is viewed as some kind of illness or disease. I mean, even the Dalai Lama wrote a book called Healing Anger as if it was some kind of disease. It's not a disease. It's a very valid emotion that's so useful when it's used well. However, because it's so bullied, so it's very like masculinity. It's actually a masculine energy. So it gets bullied as soon as it shows up. So for a lot of people watching this, when they first started to show anger naturally, how it moved through them, what they heard was, don't speak back to me. Don't talk to me like that. Go to your room. Bad boy, bad girl, whatever it was. It might not have been exactly that, but generally anger isn't tolerated in the West. You're told to put it away and come back when it's not there anymore. Now that's window dressing of how you feel. That's contrivance of self. That's like, keep your real substance of your feeling away and tell me about it. Don't be in it. Tell me about it. It's a totally different thing. So you picture anger now. So for most people, anger is the first thing they strapped up and pretended they didn't have. So they pretend they don't have it. And so then it builds up in that area until they have an outburst. But because it was locked up, and this is where we separate the baby and the bathwater. So anger is anger. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter if I stand on your foot, tread on your hand, or try and steal your girlfriend. You're going to be angry. It's different appropriate anger, obviously. But what's different in all of us, in every human being, what's different is what happens, how I spasm my body when the anger moves through me. Yeah. So for some of you might go, rah, 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 rah. Others might go and walk off silently. Some might slam the door. Some might drip feed the anger over weeks. They might spit in your drink, make you a crap cup of tea, not invite you out next time. Only individuals know honestly how they drip feed their anger, because they can't wield it dexterously and say, yo, man, I'm really angry because of this. I thought you were doing this to me. Can we have this out? So because they don't deal with anger that way, it becomes something totally different. And that's what's happened to people's sensuality and their sexuality. It's exactly the same. So because of all the issues of shame and blame and uncertainty and judgment and spasming around what happens when you feel stimulated around here and here, what ends up happening is it comes out in all these different ways, all these spasms that often are not very dexterous. They're not very skillful, and we end up spending a lot of our mental agility trying to window dress what just happened, or trying to apologize, or wishing and aspiring to learn different coping strategies to make that look cooler and look like more of a man next time. So what I do in my work is I bypass all the coping strategy shit. I bypass all the stuff about learning things to do with his body, and I say, that's your uniqueness. That's going to be you. What I'll do is I will help you separate the baby in the bathwater in you, so you can heal off all that toxic shame and guilt stuff, so you can safely touch this feeling, this substance, this stuff that's really you, your real masculinity. Feel where it's at, know that it's okay for it to spasm and lash a bit. Let's create healthy space for that, and then let's get good with it. And I'll tell you what, without a shadow of a doubt, in every case, women love it, because it's authentic, it's original, it's coming from within you, it's not contrived. I don't tell guys how to act, I just tell them how to undo the mental part, undo that bit, and then the rest is always authentic. It's always you. It's never anything. We've dealt with all the conditioning, we've dealt with all the window dressing, and then it's unique every time. It's just delicious. It's delicious work to be in. And obviously, I'm only able to give you a small taster here in this conversation, but I hope, while it sounds abstract in this outlay, I hope I've given some insight into the sort of space that I work in with guys.
Yeah, man, and it's a beautiful thing, a masterpiece that you just put together here.
Thank you.
That I'm just like grasping in my own head here, and that's what I love about it. It's that if I could sum it up, man, it sounds like it's like, you know, you're unraveling, like if we could imagine like onions, right? Like inside of us, we're just cracking through the layers until we get to the core of it, and that is what we actually are. And I love that you bring up anger, you bring up like, you know, the frustrations, but it's also like also the sadness, also the pain that all men feel, right? That we lay on top of that.
Rejection.
Right? All of
rejection,
that.
Man. Man. Yeah, that's it. Because these are all part of our natural spasms, though. So the key is, all of them are natural, normal feelings. To feel rejection, to feel neglected, to feel, you know, to feel unwanted, to desire to feel wanted. All of these are completely natural. The key is, how do we react when we feel those things? So it's not, nobody else is feeling that. It's just me. So it's then like, I'm feeling a bit of anxiety, I'm feeling a bit exposed, whatever. If I then do all these complex behaviors to conceal that, or to pretend that's not true, nobody else is doing that. That's just me keeping busy. I can keep myself so busy, frantically trying to remember things to do, and think, oh, did you see that I didn't do that thing? That, you know, I could just keep this game going. And that's why, you know, it's just a game. I'm all about ending that game, just to give it. I mean, when you talk about giving yourself a break, I am really about how to, you know, trying to get into that space to how to give yourself a break, because otherwise we end up with this two layers going on. The layer of the wounded me, where I'm really at, and this is me aspiring, this is me trying, this is me, the skills I've learned in the workshops and the stuff I've learned from all the gurus and stuff. This is the layer above the real me. I'm going to do what all those guys are doing, hoping that's going to fill in this bit that I feel like I'm missing, you know? Whereas I think whenever I've spoken to anybody working with guys, that's never the aspiration, that's never the intention. The intention is always to share effective tools, but always for the guys to own it and make it theirs, never to kind of conceal. Now, obviously, there's always an element of fake it till you make it, always. And I always allow for that, but it's like, it's always about the, you know, the motivation behind it. As long as the motivation is good, as long as you're not seeking to conceal or defraud, you know, i.e. trying to make out you're the ultimate man when really, you know, you're quite wounded and you've got a bit of work to do, you know. There's a way to be a strong man in there without needing to paint the picture of being ultimate, to be about a strong man with your frailty and your work still to be done. But it's all about how you react to it. That's what I was saying earlier. It's like, you know, if I have vulnerability and shame issues from the past and somebody highlights them to me, I can either look at them calmly and go, oh, you saw that in me, well spotted, I respect your insight. Or I could go, oh, they saw that in me, oh no, they know I'm a fraud, oh dear, you know. There's two ways we can deal with how we're exposed on our blind spots or how we're exposed on our weaknesses. And none of it is about the feeling being wrong. The feeling is always right. The feeling is always okay. If you react to it, that's the problem. And that's why I call it mental healing. It's about getting your mind to help your emotions become skillful, to help your sensuality become skillful. And then there's no problem. It doesn't matter where you are on your journey to being your ultimate man. You can feel okay in the process, because you're taking care of yourself. And even if somebody does make a scathing comment, my value isn't based on them. I don't need to take that personally. You know, and that's the big thing. I think especially for younger men, because of the culture we're in, there's so much that's about external value. So your masculinity is determined by other people rather than yourself. And that's the other thing I really seek to heal. And that is to heal the fact that that value can only ever come from within. And as long as it's coming from somewhere else, then you will be vulnerable when people reject you, or when people make comments about you, because you have given their, you know, you've got a boundary issue there. But that's a slightly different conversation.
Wow.
Still related, but different.
And I love the fact that you said that, you know, there's like that part of us that is really us. And then we layer that on top with, you know, what we see and what we model and who we want to be. And then we feel like, I want to be like Tony Robbins and, you know, big hands and all this other stuff, right? And we try and be like that. And I know this is true because I've been there too. And I'm sure you've been there too, man. That, you know, we try and be someone else, but that's not ultimately what you are. And that's not the ultimate definition of what an ultimate man is, right? It's and this
that's
is
right.
It's like, it doesn't matter what I say it is. It doesn't matter what you say it is. It's what that person actually wants it to be. You know, and then you step into that, then bang, you know, and you live that. Who's to say you are not an ultimate man wherever you're at right now?
That's the point. This is what I say. I always get people to look around the room and I say, does anybody here look like you? And does anybody here dress like you? And what I say to them is, I always look around the room and I say, I see the effortlessness with which you've presented yourself to me today. I see the effortlessness with which you've arranged your hair and chosen your clothes. I would like to see the same for your interpretation of the masculine. I'd like to see the same for your interpretation of the feminine. I'd like you to make that same claim that whatever flavor it looks like on you, that you choose the top and the trousers of what that's going to look like in the same way as you choose your shirt and trousers. That's that kind of, let's get away from definition and get into expression. Let's stop defining what it is and let's see what it looks like when it comes out. And let's go with that and let's play. But if we don't get the spirit of play back in there, we're doomed to judgment and to perfection that can never appear. And that's a real issue we've got, is this kind of allowance of play. I mean, can I just mention a slight tangent that's really related to this? Yeah. And it's about why I think we have problems with not just masculinity, but with connection with other people. Because obviously, with not just women, but other guys as well, there's a desire to connect there, but we've got to manage it, because in our culture, and I include any westernized cultures, anybody speaking the English language, I include them. So in our cultures, I'm not allowed to look you in the eyes too deeply before you think I want something from you that's beyond the sensual, you know, that's beyond the physical. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. I'm not allowed to really put my hand on your knee with too much sensuality because of how people might judge that. And it's not whether you, I mean, if you and I were really homie bros, it wouldn't be a problem, you know, and we were really close, it wouldn't be a problem. But if we'd like only met recently, then there would be a voice going on in my mind and a voice going on in your mind as to what's going on here. And especially with women, you know, if I look too deeply at a woman or look too deeply at a man, or put my hand on her knee or her elbow. Now, if you look at mammal groups, we're a mammal group. I do a lot of my work is about top mammal. It's like, we're meant to be top mammal. I look at these guys walking down the street and I'm like, is this the top mammal? Is this the creature that, you know, undulated across this landscape and brought it all under his domain? And I look at the guys walking down the street with their shoulders and their eyes hooded, and I'm like, no, what's happened to us? We've become this domesticated beast. So I'm really into getting into that wilding, that mammalian nature again. And one of the aspects of the mammal is, if you look at mammal groups, they're all deeply sensual. And what I mean by that is they're contact rich. The lions are lolling about all over in the savannah. You know, they're licking each other's ears. The monkeys are picking fleas off each other. But nobody's got a hard on. Okay? In our culture, we are contact starved from childhood. We are told contact is violence. I'm dealing with this with my children at the minute. They're going to nursery and they're just exploring space, but what they're learning is all contact is violence. And it's not. You're learning the spectrum of, if I touch you like this, that's contact, but if I do this, that's violence, you know. But kids aren't getting taught that. They're getting taught all contact violence. And now we're told, I mean, we're now getting taught as adults, all contact is assault. You know, it's assault. You can put your hand on somebody and they can do you for assault. Now, what that means is we live in a contact-starved culture. And because we are sensual beings, it means that if you contact me, I will be stimulated. But if I am contact-starved, then I may become aroused. We have what I call the sex slide. It's a wound to heal, where at the minute we're on this slide where if I touch you, it's either violence or sex, you see? So culture has it now that I either want to hurt you or I want to have sex with you if I contact you. And with a woman or with whatever, we've got to deal with that wound where it's like, oh, there's contact, I'm being stimulated, woo, down the slide into sex, or this person wants sex. And it's like, no, there's a huge spectrum in there where a mammalian connection can blossom, where we can actually become deep friends, like deep friends, deep trust, deep connection, without me needing to stick my knob in you, you know, or desiring it, or you being afraid of that. However, what we've got to accept is while we're in this contact-starved period, there is, you know, I mentioned the spasming earlier. We're in this period where we've got to allow for the fact in our relationships that because we're contact-starved, we must take responsibility for the fact that we may become aroused in our sensual journey, and we may confuse rapport, connection, connecting over ideology. We can confuse all of these as being sexual because we're sensually stimulated by them.
Yeah.
Because our sensual spectrum is haywire, we can be all turned on thinking, this girl, she's the one, man, I love her. And actually, it's just because you really got on this one subject, and then you hear what she feels about something else, and you're like, oh man, that girl, I thought she was it, but oh my goodness, no. And it's because of our confusion in sensuality and sexuality. And so this is a huge part to me of the healing the masculine wound as well. And when I'm with women, I try to say to them, women get aroused internally. That's why. So really, I don't know if you know or not, but all mammal fetuses are female first until day 42 or something. And there's a reason I cover that in my gender work, why that is. But really, the same material goes inside to make ovaries in a woman, and it goes outside to make balls and a penis in a man. But it's the same material, the same sensorial units. So I say to the women that I work with, I'm like, you know, yeah, you get all your sensuality on the inside. I said, but you imagine walking around with a clitoris the size of your hand pressing against your clothes all the time. And imagine what that's like to be stimulated by the world around you. And I've had women all of a sudden, you know, really start to feel empathy for the challenge guys have got because you can't tell if a woman's aroused when you look at her. But guys, we've got to like have hands in pockets and put our phone in the pocket and stuff like that. And there's this real journey of the exposure of our arousal and the exposure of our interest, even our curiosity. Because of our sensuality being broken, our curiosity, you know, just enjoyment of the moment can stimulate us. It doesn't mean we want sex, but while we're still healing that wound of sensuality, there's a lot of judgment, criticism, and self-judgment we've got to get over before we can really enjoy being a guy, enjoy the sensuality without demanding it, other people to jump in and meet the needs of it. I can be like, wow, I'm really enjoying being with you just now. And it doesn't mean I need to reach out and grab you or pin you to the ground and give you one, you know. Whereas in the past, it did mean that, you know. When I was a young lad, it did mean that because I was so confused about my sensuality. Whereas gradually getting into that space where my spasms became, quick wank, oh, porn, oh, I need to have sex with that girl. All of a sudden, instead, that's become, oh, I don't need to do that. I've got a whole spectrum here. I've got a whole spectrum of enjoyment. And that's you know, getting into that process of enjoyment is what I seek to do with guys and women, because obviously the end goal is quite, you know, you can already tell from the conversation that it's a project to get this with that. But that's the same. I mean, it took ages to get good with these hands. It took me a decade, at least a decade, if not more, to get good with these hands. Why do we expect our sensuality to require any less attention than learning to write or to do art? It's like it requires the same level of diligence. And it's only when we give it that context, if we give it that diligence, we can become as good. You know, I mean, as good. And that's my heart and soul is in that work. You know, I think you can forget the rest of the problems we've got in culture. I think what we've got is a gender crisis. And until men and women sort out how to get on with each other, we're just going to be busy filling our lives with work and distraction and war and politics and just boring rubbish because we're afraid of connecting. You know, and it's to fill the hole of the fact that really what I want is to be really sensually met. And when I do, I don't want anything else. I don't need anything else. This is actually what I wanted. And all the rest was just filling that hole. And in some of the work that I do with guys, I say to them, you're either filling the hole, which is HOLE, and that's when we're the consumer. It's like, I want more sex, I want more drugs, I want more booze, I want more I want more food. That's when we're filling this hole inside. It's unfillable, you know. I want more sex, I want more of this. And so as long as we're either filling the hole or we are whole, we're serving the whole, and that's that we're serving from, that's WHOLE. So we are going from filling the HOLE, which is I'm empty, fill me up, to coming from being whole, WHOLE, which is, you know, I'm good as I am and I can connect to you from that place. I don't need you to fill some perceived lack in myself. And when we're coming from that place, all of a sudden our relationships are transformed. Just everything gets transformed. But the funny thing is, it's really quite simple. We heal it in the mind. When you heal it in the mind, you give the space for the rest to heal. And obviously, it does take time for the body to become dexterous. But when the mind is well and it's not judging you for it, then all of a sudden you've got a supportive process. Like going to a class with a good mate where you become good at martial arts over 5 years, that sort of thing. You create that relationship between your mind and your sensuality, your mind and your sexuality, and you all of a sudden have a journey of joy, but also pain. But because you don't overreact to the pain, that's the key. Pain is natural, rejection is natural, all these things are natural. It's just about how you react to them. And when you get on top of your reaction, everything else is easier. And it's funny, that wasn't even one of my own insights. That was a lesson I got from an old employer of mine. And it was one of the greatest lessons in life I ever heard. And he said to me, you know, learn to manage your expectations, Chris, he said. Manage your expectations. And this was to do with making sales in the workplace because I was dejected. And I sat with that and I realized what a profound meaning it was, because actually all disappointment, all sense of failure, all sense of rejection comes from having an expectation. If you don't have an expectation, it's impossible to feel rejected. It's impossible to feel let down because I've just gone in not knowing what I'm going to get.
Amazing.
So managing expectations. Bring it, man. Yeah.
Good, man. Chris, man, we got to start wrapping up the show. There's just so much knowledge that you just bombed in on this interview, man. I don't even know if people are keeping up. I think they're going to have to listen to it again and again. And so, Chris, man, we're going to wrap up the show. And so, man, if people want to get connected with you and your work, where's the best place they can go to?
Okay. On YouTube, my website, I'm under Alternative Answers, all one word. I've also got a bunch of talks on authority that were under my rite of passage for me involved me changing my name to my middle name, which is Chris. My boy's name, which is the name my mum used to give me into trouble with, is Darren. So you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube under Darren Deojee about authority. And it's really important for masculinity because authority is about the author. It's about the story. And all my work is about helping you change the story of your life to become the authority, to become the storyteller. So you'll find that under Darren Deojee and Alternative Answers. But masterdeojee.com, that's DEOJEE, masterdeojee.com is my website. It's really messy because I'm about the oral tradition. That's what we're sharing here, which is as old as our species. Whereas what you'll find on my website is my penmanship, which is much younger than the oral tradition. So there is stuff on there. I've got a new member section going up, which is going to include masculinity. So please check that out. If it's not up when you check it out, it'll be up in a week or two. Otherwise, I know I'm a long way away from your viewers, but if anybody's coming to the UK, I do men's and mixed gender events. But yeah, check me out on the website. You'll find everything you need on there. There's not a lot on there, but contact me, connect with me. I do one-to-ones. I also do invitations. So if people want to organize a group, I'll travel anywhere and run both men only and mixed gender events and one-to-ones. Get in touch, guys. I mean, I guarantee that what you get with me is unique. Nobody else is doing it this way. It is a unique approach. And yeah, I mean, I'm really passionate about sharing this healing work with guys, and I've got amazing testimonials to go with it. And, you know, if you guys get something out of this, then wonderful. I've tried to share a few of the powerful points that help bring change here. I've got loads more like that are as effective in cutting through some of the crap we've all got to contend with. So please get in touch. If you want to have another conversation on this, Richard, I'd love to come back on and we'll maybe talk about another aspect of the masculine challenge. We could do that in another time. And otherwise, it's been a real pleasure to be on. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Thank you. And guys, we're going to add all those resources into the show notes as well. So Chris, man, thank you for jumping on the show, man. Really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. And so awesome. And so guys, this wraps up another episode of the Forge Your Life podcast today with Chris Deojee, right? The mental healer here. And of course, this is the thing here, guys. I know Chris wants this. I know Chris and I want this to happen. We don't want to keep this a secret. We don't need to get this out there. So make sure you head on to iTunes and rate the show so that we can spread the message, so that we can bring this message out, not just Chris's message, but all the other guests on the show. So we really appreciate that. And of course, you can get all the show notes, all the resources that Chris has mentioned here over at richardfood.com. And remember, guys, go out there, go live with love and go smash it.